Hi everybody, thanks for joining us for our second video in our VIPRE series where we're talking about the VIPRE Endpoint Security Management Console and some of the tips and tricks that you can do to make using your VIPRE software easier and kind of do some of the automation tasks that are really cool that we can do with this management console. In our first video, we talked about the site properties dialog box, how to add your license, how you can do some things like set up email alerts and set up credentials to use for remote deployments and whatnot. In this second video, we're just going to kind of talk about the general organizational logic with this management console. All right, so let's kind of get in here. You might remember that in the first video, we talked about going into site properties and then having this unprotected computer discovery piece set up so that VIPRE will then scour your network for computers. So I've already done this part. So as you can see, VIPRE has found a whole bunch of computers on my network. And the key thing to understand is VIPRE puts them into two different buckets. Okay, so first of all, recognize that I'm at the top of my tree. I'm going to get into this policy piece in a little bit, but let's just talk about first. I'm at the top of my tree, so I'm kind of seeing everything. And there's two main tabs here that I want to recognize. One is unprotected and one is protected. Obviously, the protected tab showing me computers that actually have the VIPRE software on it. The unprotected tab showing me the ones that don't have VIPRE yet. As you can also see, I have a button to install now, which will literally execute an installation of VIPRE. And if you watch the first video, you might remember up here in site properties that I had given VIPRE some credentials to use to execute these installations. Aha, very key, right? So when I click this install now button, it's going to then use those domain credentials that I put in earlier to push out these installations and execute them. So really nice. I mean, I could literally install a whole bunch of computers all in one shot here with this mechanism. It's a really quick, nice, easy way to get your stuff installed. So, but the key thing to know is that protected and unprotected are the two tabs here that are going to show you computers, and this is going to be an important piece to kind of understand the logic of how you're going to view your computers. Now, there's these other tabs over here. I'm going to get into those in just a second. I'm going to now switch gears to talking about these policies. So underneath Windows policies, it's going to show you all of the policies that you have set up in your VIPRE environment. By default, you're going to get default for laptops, default for servers, and default for workstations. All these other ones are ones that I created here. Like, for example, earlier I made this policy called Nathan's personal policy. And this is what I use to install the two computers that I have in here, okay? If I go back to Windows policies and go to unprotected, again, I will see all my computers. Um, the other thing that's really nice to understand here is that things can be dragged and dropped around here. So when I went back to Nathan's personal policy, let's say I wanted to take this computer here and I wanted to give it a new policy. Let's say I wanted to set it back to the default policy. I could literally just pick up this computer and drag and drop it up to the default for workstations policy. And now that computer is in there. So very cool way that you can just kind of move computers around from different policies. Very typically, people are going to have several policies up here. If you have a big network, you might have a policy for your accounting department. You might have a policy for like your sales department. They might have different rules. I mean, that would be really common, right? So this is a quick way that you can move computers and in between your settings and your policy groups. All right, so as we march through each policy section, you'll notice that the tabs up here are the same. All right, and we're going to talk about in a later video how to change the policy settings, but I don't want to really go through that yet. We're going to save that because that's really its own video. For now, I just want to make sure that I get across kind of the logic of the GUI and how you view this. Notice as we go down, we got sections for Mac, we got sections for Hyper-V, and really the logic up here is the same. You've got a tab for unprotected and a tab for protected, and this is where your machines are going to show up. Now, some other tabs here that are important. Obviously, your quarantine tab is really important. You're going to probably be looking at this on a semi-regular basis, right? And if we right-click on different things in the quarantine, we can click on details and get some information. When was, this found? what's the path and all of those kinds of things for the quarantine. So really important to know how to use the quarantine. Obviously, you've got a delete option. You've got an unquarantine option. So if VIPRE found something that it shouldn't have quarantined, you can quickly unquarantine something to release it and give it back to the user. Okay. The patch management section, we're going to have a whole video where we just talk about patch management. That's really something more in the policies piece. Um, but this is where you can kind of look and see which computers are missing patches very quickly. Obviously gives you a graph, so it's just a quick visual thing there. All right. And then some of the other tabs in here talk about your agent installs, when they were installed, those kinds of things, so you kind of know how far back your installations go. And then device control, we're going to talk about device control in a later video and some of the things that that VIPRE can do. But the key thing I wanted to get through in this video is just kind of the logic of the GUI, how you look at these tabs and how each policy container has its own set of tabs that are applied to that policy container. And so that's a key thing to understand. Okay, so that's it for video number 2. Come back for video number 3. We're going to talk a little bit about how to install VIPRE. There's a couple different ways where we can do installations. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to do VIPRE installations and some different methods that might work for you. Thanks for joining us today for video number 2. Check back soon for video number 3 on VIPRE installations.